focus of right now. Wilder, Fury 2, here we go.
I don't understand what's going on at the moment, because that fight, and I texted Mannix. Me and Mannix have fallen out a little bit, I still love him, but I kept texting him before the fight saying, Chris, you have to understand, this fight is a final eliminator for Devin Haney. Yeah, but we all know the WBC, blah, blah. I said, no, Chris, this fight is a final eliminator to fight Devin Haney. The winner of this fight is going to be ordered to fight Devin Haney. So you can't ignore that fact. These are two guys. Ryan Garcia, Golden Boy Promotions, have a contract with DAZN. Devin Haney, Matchroom, have a contract with DAZN. Ryan Garcia is the mandatory challenger for Devin Haney. This is a wonderful fight where the winner of that fight will be WBC World Champion, however you want to dress it up. So my thoughts were, but I think Devin gets a little bit frustrated as well, because they never mention his name, ever. And I don't understand why. It's all Tank Davis, Teofimo Lopez. Why not Devin Haney? Devin Haney is the champion. You are now mandatory challengers to Devin Haney. And we have a problem in this sport where we can't make the big fights because of politics, because of cross-network promotions. Well, guess what? With this fight, there isn't any. We can make this fight this week. And I know, having spoken to DAZN want to move forward and make Ryan Garcia against Devin Haney.
Therein lies the dilemma. Ryan Garcia himself had this to say. He says, boo-hoo, poor Eddie, not getting his way. The people want Davis versus Garcia. No such thing as a real champion when coming to belts. It's about being the people's champion. Go cry me a river. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. There are a multitude of problems here that perhaps aren't immediately visible on the surface, but Ryan Garcia doesn't seem to value his title shot against Devin Haney as much as he values a Gervonta Davis fight. Ryan Garcia is not a world champion yet. He's not.
He isn't.
By definition, the fighter who is in possession of a world title, which makes him a world champion, is Devin Haney. And he is not viewed as such by certain factions of fans. He's viewed as an email champion, a paper champion, a guy who didn't have to beat anyone to become a world champion himself. That's the scope that Devin Haney is viewed in. But it's not exactly his fault. This entire convoluted mess, this entire convoluted situation is a byproduct of the WBC watering down the sport of boxing, of the WBC watering down what it means to be a champion by having too many titles, too many designations in circulation.
They created this mess.
They've created a situation to where the very contenders in their rank standings don't care too much about becoming champions with them. They have lessened the value of their own world title. At least in the lightweight division they have.
You have any idea what a big mess they've created?
Teofimo Lopez is the WBC's franchise champion, or at least one of them. Canelo was the inaugural champion. Then, Vasyl Lomachenko was given that designation, and apparently Teofimo won it from him. Moving forward, one is left to wonder, if by some off chance Teofimo were to lose to George Kambosos, does George Kambosos then become the WBC's franchise champion? What happens there?
Yeah.
Because this franchise designation is intended to stay with its bearer even after they go to a different weight class. So let's say Teofimo Lopez goes up there to 140 pounds. He gets beat by some guy. Does that guy then become the franchise champion? How's it like?
How's it happen?
The funniest thing about it is, if Teofimo Lopez were to leave the lightweight division right now, the only version of the WBC title that would make someone a full-fledged WBC champion is the title that Devin Haney's currently holding. Whatever happens with Teofimo, whatever happens to that franchise status that he won from Vasyl Lomachenko, whatever reconciliation is or isn't reached when it comes to that, after he leaves this weight class, the version of the title that's still going to be around, the version of the title that's still going to be fought for, is the version of the title that Devin Haney's got. Ryan, he doesn't seem to give two fucks about it.
WBC's responsible for that.
Wanted to carve out this special little lane for marquee fighters. Marquee fighters to have their pick of the litter, devoid of the obligations that come with being a champion. You carve out this little fucking lane, and you've created a convoluted mess that lessens the value of your world title. Because in spite of Ryan having fought in a WBC final eliminator, he doesn't seem to have any intention of shooting for his title shot. He has no intention of fighting Devin Haney in the near future. Bear in mind,
That's the WBC's fault.
not Ryan's. They're diluting the sport of boxing. They are diluting these divisions and watering them down and lessening what it means to be a champion. Thus, it's not a surprise that Ryan Garcia is going to do things his way.
Not yours.
On his terms. He's not all that concerned with holding the version of the title that Devin Haney has because the WBC themselves lessened its value.
Idiots.
As far as what I'd like to see, in truth, Ryan is preferential to fighting Gervonta as opposed to Devin Haney, and I'm not castigating him for it. I'm not judging him harshly. As far as those two fights, as far as I'm concerned, they're interchangeable. I view either one. I'm okay with either one of those fights happening next, assuming, that Ryan does fight Gervonta next, which is another subject entirely.
We'll talk about that.
But if he does, I'm okay with that. I am.
If it happens.
Because if it does happen, that would be an affront to the WBC's mandate. That would be an affront to the WBC's order. Lest we forget, Mauricio Suleiman of the WBC, their president, he confirmed that they have every intention of ordering the Ryan Garcia versus Devin Haney fight. And Ryan Garcia just confirmed that he has every intention of ignoring that order. And ignoring the WBC is no less than they desire.
Those bumbling idiots.
And I know that kind of sucks for Devin, because Devin wants that Ryan Garcia fight, and Eddie Hearn, he wants that for him. But I told you guys, that fight happening has more to do with what Ryan wants or doesn't want, and less to do with what Devin and Eddie want. It's Ryan's title shot after all. He can either accept it or reject it. It's his shot to take, and, he'd rather take his shot at Gervonta Davis. Really wouldn't even be the first time that a contender walked away from a direct order from the WBC. That wouldn't be the first time I've seen that. And we might see more of that if the WBC keeps watering down the sport of boxing, if they keep watering down what it means to be a champion. Keep giving all these guys all these different fucking options. Everybody's running around with a belt that looks exactly like the other guy's belt, and suddenly, you know what? Holding that belt or whatever version of it is out there, it don't mean a hell of a lot. Don't mean a hell of a lot to the fighters. I'm sure that Mauricio Suleiman and the WBC would love to crash Ryan and Gervonta's party.
What are they going to do? Make a belt for that fight?
I'm being honest, I wouldn't put it past them, though if they did, they would only be hurting themselves in the process. They would only be shooting themselves in the foot. When it comes to that Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Davis fight, everything's looking very encouraging. Ryan Garcia wants it, Oscar De La Hoya wants it, Leonard Ellerbe wants it, Gervonta Davis wants it. I mean, everything's looking like it's all systems go for Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Davis. And I've talked about this fight in passing the last couple of days, that I'm really not convinced that this fight happens next, in spite of everything that's happening in full view of the public. Ryan Garcia, he was on Mike Tyson's podcast, trash-talking Gervonta Davis.
All right.
To which Gervonta Davis responded, if he would have hit Ryan the way Luke hit Ryan, the usual woulda, coulda, shoulda that happens with PBC fighters.
Hypotheticals.
Guys are always telling you what they woulda did because they can't tell you what they have done. He hasn't fought this guy yet. Reality, he hasn't fought any top 10 lightweights.
Stop me when I tell a lie.
Just back to the point. The enthusiasm seems to be shared on both sides for this thing. The enthusiasm does seem to be mutual. But I really do question as to whether or not this fight will happen, not just for the aforementioned reasons, the stuff I talked about in previous videos, how, fights like this, they don't necessarily get made in a jiffy, not in the sport of boxing. Ideally they would, but it doesn't really happen that way. I talked about that, Ryan Garcia having been knocked down by Luke and Gervonta Davis's handlers having been as careful with him as they have been. I find it hard to digest that they would make this fight
So fast.
in a timely fashion. That's just not how things happen. Now, part of the reason for that, the politics of boxing, I mean, you have to consider that, most of the PBC's star players, they migrated over to Fox. Deontay Wilder, Errol Spence Jr., those guys, they migrated over there. But Gervonta Davis seems to have stayed behind. He still fights on Showtime, and it does seem to be exclusive. It does seem to be exclusively. His last fight was a Showtime pay-per-view. I wonder that wouldn't be a hindrance in this situation, because we know where Ryan Garcia fights. We know what platform he's on. He's on DAZN. The same DAZN that was prepared to offer Gervonta Davis $8 million just to come over and fight Tevin Farmer. And guess what? He didn't take the money. He didn't fight him. Did you guys forget what Gervonta Davis said about that fight? That he begged Al Heyman to let him take the fight. And Al, in so many words, he convinced him not to.
He said it's all talk.
But I'll tell you what, doesn't look like it was all talk when Mikey Garcia went over there and fought Jesse Vargas for more money than he could have got anywhere else to fight Jesse Vargas. If you're trying to convince me that DAZN's money isn't real, that it's all talk.
Bullshit.
Mikey Garcia ending over there after having been involved in a PBC pay-per-view, that leads me to believe otherwise. So I think about this Gervonta Davis situation, Ryan Garcia. I think about, where would the fight take place? Who would stage the fight?
And where?
What are we talking about? We're talking about a Showtime pay-per-view, or do you see it as part of your DAZN subscription, as part of your DAZN package? I'd like to say that the fight would go to the highest bidder, but whenever the PBC is involved, things do get peculiar. Things do get strange. Reiterate, they were willing to offer Gervonta Davis $7-8 million to cross over and fight Tevin Farmer in a one-off fight, a unification match that, you know what?
What?
A lot of people would have actually favored Gervonta to win, and Al convinced him not to do it.
That didn't come from me. That came from him.
That came from Gervonta Davis. Those are his own words. I ask myself, why would Al Heyman sabotage a potential payday like that for Gervonta Davis in a fight that he stands a pretty good chance of winning?
Yeah.
And the most I could think of is loyalty to his network affiliates, that he's not going to let, the content that he promised them go someplace else and be content for someone else. That's the only way I can reconcile Al not letting him take that money.
Telling him not to take that fight.
Gervonta could have won that fight. That's not the most far-fetched proposition I've ever heard. So you've got to make it make sense. You've got to make it make sense as to why Al would have talked him out of that. And the only way it makes sense is if he wanted to ensure that the content he promised Showtime doesn't end up over there on DAZN being content for them. This is the same platform, you understand? This is the same DAZN from before. The only difference here is, you'd be dealing with a Golden Boy Promotions fighter as opposed to a Matchroom fighter. But it's the same situation. It's a cross-platform situation. So where does the fight happen? Golden Boy Promotions, I think about their end of it, and I don't know that Golden Boy Promotions would allow Ryan Garcia to go over there to Showtime and be content for them when, guess what?
What?
Golden Boy Promotions ain't in the Canelo Alvarez business anymore.
They're not.
And that was their star player. Given that they're not providing Canelo Alvarez to DAZN, the guy that moves the needle, given that they're not doing that for DAZN anymore. Granted that Canelo's next two fights might very well be on DAZN, that's not by way of Golden Boy Promotions. That does change things, and because things have changed, can Golden Boy Promotions afford to send Ryan Garcia
To Showtime.
Can they afford to send him somewhere else?
I don't know.
To another platform? How would DAZN feel about that?
I don't know.
This is yet another reason I have my skepticism. I have my doubts as to whether or not this fight will happen next.
There's a lot to reconcile.
And finally, per tweet from Mike Kopinger, Virgil Ortiz and Maurice Hooker are in advanced discussions toward a welterweight fight that would headline DAZN on March 27th in Dallas. Big step up for one of boxing's best young fighters. Love this matchup, and I have to agree, I do like the idea of this fight, though I am a bit surprised that Maurice Hooker is involved, because last I checked, he'd inked a multi-fight deal with the PBC. Raging Babe expressed a very similar sentiment. She said, I thought Maurice Hooker signed with the PBC. Interesting that they're letting him, quote-unquote, cross the street in his first fight with them, unless he's no longer with the PBC, to which Dan Rafael replied, he never did.
What?
That wasn't true. Very startling turn of events, a very startling response from Dan Rafael, because then, like now, it was Mike Kopinger that reported Mighty Mo had signed to the PBC, and here he is again saying that, Mighty Mo's going to be making his next appearance not on a PBC card, but on a Golden Boy Promotions card on the DAZN platform. I mean, we know what the implication here is.
We know.
We're all aware of that report from back in August that stated, he'd inked a multi-fight deal, PBC.
What happened?
So it does seem strange that he'd be making his next in-the-ring appearance
In March.
someplace else with someone else. The inference you can make is that, I don't know, maybe that relationship didn't pan out. That report from back in August stated that Mighty Mo would be making his welterweight debut against Josecito Lopez, with things having fizzled out between Mighty Mo and Regis Pregarius. I don't know if you guys remember, but they were supposed to fight, and they couldn't come to an agreement on the weight. Since then, Regis Pregarius has fought under the PBC banner, at least once.
Yeah.
We saw Josecito Lopez make ring appearance as well on the undercard of Spence versus Garcia, but what we haven't seen is Mighty Mo. Who we haven't seen. It is a bona fide case of he said, she said, because Mike said that Mighty Mo had signed to the PBC, and what Dan is saying is that never happened. That wasn't the case. And I feel so inclined to believe Dan, because you know what? Mighty Mo ain't fighting over there, is he?
Make it make sense.
Back in August, when that news first broke, I understood the move. Mighty Mo had outgrown the 140-pound division. He couldn't make that weight healthy anymore, so he was moving up to the welterweight division, and we know who's got a monopoly up there. Mighty Mo didn't want to end up in a situation like his old buddy, Terrence Crawford. He didn't want to get frozen out of the division. So, I understood what the logic was behind him having signed to the PBC, but as it turns out, maybe he didn't. Maybe Mike reported some misinformation. In any event, he's going to be fighting Virgil Ortiz in a fight that I think makes a lot of sense for Virgil.
It's pretty risky for Maurice.
Hasn't had a fight since December of 2019. Now, Virgil Ortiz, he got the fight last year, but Maurice didn't. Maurice hasn't seen any action in over 12 months.
That's not encouraging.
Granted that this is a much better weight for him, but do you really want to have to shake off cobwebs and ring rust with a guy like Virgil Ortiz?
Yeesh.
The way he's mowing guys down?
All right.